بسم الله الرحمن أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا وسيد الأولين والآخرين بالقاسم محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتخبين المنتجبين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. Amma ba'd, my respected brothers and sisters, my elders and learned scholars, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight's discussion is ISIS, or the gene of ISIS. And the reason why I chose that topic is, or the title for the topic is the gene of extremism, which is ISIS, is that in this day and age, somehow, for good or bad intentions, the West is painting this idea of extremism in Islam as something newborn, as something that is new. That ISIS just got formed maybe 5 or 6 years ago because Saddam fell, or because this, or because Bashar al-Assad isn't liked, or whatever it may be. But the reality of it is that ISIS is an ideology and a philosophy and a theory that has existed amongst the Muslim ranks for more than 1400 years and was there at the very inception of this religion of Islam. When we look at this extreme element whereby people kill and butcher in the name of God, or for the sake of God, or for the preservation of the ideal of God, the first person whom we must call out as the root cause of the problem has to be Abu Sufyan. And this is not myself speaking, this is Imam Hussein alayhi salam Allah in Karbala. Whereby Imam Hussein, when he enters the plain of Karbala and he addresses 35,000 extreme, militant, radical, Al-Qaeda mentality, ISIS mentality, Boko Haram mentality individuals, how did the Imam address them? He didn't call them ISIS, he didn't call them whatever name, because you got to understand, the 35,000 in the ranks of Ibn Ziyad lanatullah alayh were not all supporters of Yazid, no. There were the Khawarij, there were the tribal people, there were the people of Medina who were still hating Ahlul Bayt because their ancestors were killed by Ali ibn Abi Talib in the battles of Badr, Uhud, Hunayn. So it wasn't just one group fighting Imam Hussein, it was a whole multitude of people fighting Imam Hussein alayhi salamullah. And that's why that you find each one of these armies, the brigades, had their own generals and commanders. That's because the people under Hur alayhi salam would not allow someone from Syria to be their general. Rather, they wanted someone from Kufa to lead over them. And the people who were the supporters from Medina, they did not want Hur to be leading over them because they wouldn't accept him. He's not from their people. So there were many agendas there. But Imam Hussein didn't call them by their agenda. He called them by the root cause of their mentality. He looked at them and said, "Oh, the Shia of Abu Sufyan, Ya Shi'at Abu Sufyan. Oh, the followers of Abu Sufyan's mentality and ideology. For what reason do you wish to kill me? Have I brought innovation in this religion? Have I changed this religion? Have I killed anyone from amongst you? Do I owe any of you money?" They said, "No. بُغْضًا لِأَبِيكَ Ali ibn Abi Talib. That's the only reason we want to hate you. Out of hatred for your father, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam Allah. Sallu ala nabi. To understand Abu Sufyan's mentality, we need to understand the role that he played. before the advent of Islam, during the mission of propagating the religion of Islam, and the role he played after the passing from this world to the next of Rasulullah. Abu Sufyan came from the same lineage as Rasulullah. They shared a lineage. Now there's two differing agreements, two different theories on how they are related. Abdul Manaf being the first person in both theories. Abdul Manaf, Manaf means the high. And Abdul Manaf was the great grandfather of Rasulullah. Abdul Manaf had 4 children. 2 of these 4 children was Sakhar, and the other one was, Umayyah and Umayyah's brother. There were 2. And then the other 2 were the 2 who are from Bani Hashim. Now the theory says that Umayyah was actually a Roman slave who was captured by the Arabs and sold in Mecca. And Abdul Manaf bought him, and instead of buying him as a slave, adopted him as his own son. Because he didn't want to treat him like a slave in the house, he said, I'm giving you the right of a son. Another theory says no, he was an actual son of Abdul Manaf, but from another wife, not from the same wife whom Bani Hashim are born from. So Yazid, Muawiyah, all these guys are somehow, some way distant relatives of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salamullah. But despite being the wealthier family, they didn't like the fact that the prestige of Bani Hashim was higher than their own. The prestige of Bani Hashim was the following. Hashim is not the actual name. Hashim is a title given, and it means the bread breaker. Hisham means one who constantly break bread. And his generosity was so much that even if he had a single loaf of bread, he would share it with the people. Remember yesterday when we spoke about Nabi Ibrahim's generosity. So people loved him for his generosity. Whereas the other 2 were miserly. They had money but they didn't share because their money was to show off. So you had one part of the family who was being greedy, conjuice if you would, right? And the other side of the family was being sakhi, right? And sakhi, if you want to understand what sakhawat means in at least the Islamic terminology, as sakhi, they came to Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salamullah, and they said, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, what is the difference between your grandfather Amir al-Mu'mineen and Hatim al-Tayy? Hatim al-Tayy was known as the generous of all of Arabia, one of the 2 personalities who was from the days of Jahiliyyah that Rasulullah praised. Hatim was extremely known for his generosity. And when asked about the difference, and the reason why they asked this difference is because Hatim used to own a big house, and he owned all the 12 houses next to it. And what Hatim would do is he broke down all the walls between these 12 houses. So when a beggar came into town, he would knock on the door of Hatim. Hatim would open the door and give the beggar. But Hatim used to cover his face with a mask. He would give the beggars. Then he would run to the next door and stand behind it in case the beggar didn't feel that they got enough the first time and they need to go to ask somebody else. Hatim said, I still want it to be myself who gives. And he would do the same with the 3rd and the 4th and the 5th and the 6th until all the way, because he wanted to make sure that he was the one who facilitates for the poor. That's called Kareem, generous. Imam says Ali ibn Abi Talib is not just Kareem, he is Sakhi. They said, what is Sakhi? He said, Ali's generosity is that when he gives you, you never need to go to the door next to him. But you've got to understand that Rasulullah and Ali ibn Abi Talib, they weren't just born biologically prophets and imams, no. It's this condition when you follow back from Khatam to Adam, every one of their ancestors was good. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to be good. Bani Umayyah, on the flip side of the coin, Allah calls them a shajar al-khabitha, the foul and mischievous tree. When you follow their lineage, they're all bad people. Abu Sufyan and his, crew, so as to speak, detested the fact that Rasulullah added fame onto fame. That when he said, I am Rasulullah, they didn't like the fact that their gods are now going to be destroyed. And not only is Rasulullah going to be bringing a new concept of God which they can't capitalize on, because remember, Arabia at the time was very lucrative from these idols, Hubal and all these. Whenever you came to worship them, you had to pay some, hadiyah money, right? So it was bad business when you come with this notion of a God who you can't see and you can't make idols for him. We can't capitalize on this religion of yours, Ya Rasulullah. So they came to him and they said, look, we will give you want, this Allah of yours, describe Allah for us please, so we can make this idol, and we'll give you, dividends on the yearly earnings from this new God of yours. Rasulullah said, give me the sun in my right and the moon in my left, but I will not abstain from devoting myself to this cause, that there is no God but Allah. They didn't like the idea that Rasulullah came and said to them, you cannot have slaves and make them work for free. You've got to pay them. They're no longer slaves. If you want someone to give you their service in your house, you compensate them for their time. You have a servant, not a slave. You compensate them. They didn't like that idea. Can you imagine? I've got 20 slaves at home. I never needed to pay them a penny, and today someone comes up and says, hey, you've got to pay these slaves. You've got to free these slaves. You know what that kind of reminds you of? A civil war happened because of that in this country, yes or no? The nation was divided on whether we should free the slaves or not. Rasulullah came with the same notion that we should free the slaves, not because economically or financially it's a good or a bad trade, but humanitarian values tells us that it's the right thing to do. A society which had no concern or regard for women, all of a sudden Rasulullah turned it head over heels and said, that woman which you used to bury beneath your feet, paradise is beneath her feet. And they didn't like that about Rasulullah. They didn't like that about the religion of Islam. So they opposed him. And they opposed him because they stood to lose on this trade and they could not capitalize on this trade. When they saw Rasulullah gaining momentum and his religion gaining momentum, they decided that the only way to silence the Prophet is to kill the Prophet. So they gathered from 44 different tribes, they gathered one youth from each tribe. Shaitan came to them actually in the form of a man. And he said, look, the only way you're going to kill Rasulullah and not have to worry about Bani Hashim annihilating you, because Bani Hashim were actually warriors. The only way you can kill Rasulullah without worrying about Bani Hashim coming back to attack you is to get one youth from every tribe and simultaneously stab Rasulullah to death. That way, Bani Hashim can never say who was the real perpetrator of the fatal blow. And as such, they can't fight everyone. If they fight 44 tribes, they will die. So therefore, they will have to settle for blood money. At that moment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet their plan. And when he revealed the plan, Rasulullah left Mecca on the night journey of Hijrah, and Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salamullah slept in the bed of Rasulullah to ensure the safety that Khatam al-Nabiyyin left the house. After that incident, Rasulullah goes to Medina. Notice, the Prophet is looking for the peaceful alternative. He didn't want to fight, he went to Medina. When he went to Medina, he settled amongst the people of Medina as a person who was invited to Medina. And it was the father of Jabir, it was Abdullah, who wrote to Rasulullah and sent 2 emissaries saying, O Prophet of God, if the people of Mecca do not want you, we will welcome you as a mediator amongst us. So Rasulullah was invited to Medina, and when he went to Medina, I'm sure most of you remember watching the film The Message, where the people were playing the drums, Tala'ul Badru Alayna, right? The nasheed, which is well known. The moon has finally come to us after many nights of darkness. So welcome, welcome towards us, O He who will guide us to the rightful path. And Rasulullah came to the people, and he was welcomed by the Jewish community, by the Christian community, by the atheist community, by the two warring tribes. They all welcomed Rasulullah as a peaceful negotiator. And he saw to the people, and he made sure everyone's affairs were dealt at the most righteous way. It may have not been the best way according to our understanding, but it was the most righteous way according to being fair and equal. Bani Umayyah's Abu Sufyan, who was the head of that tribe, was not content that Muhammad is still not dead, and that Muhammad is now finding more support in Medina than he did in Mecca. So he made it incumbent upon himself to do the two things. Number one, to continue harassing the Muslims of Mecca. Number two, to rob their caravans and financially sanction them, right, to destroy the economy of anyone who was Muslim. Number three, he began to take it upon himself to go to the Jewish and the Christian communities and to tell them that Rasulullah is actually an extremist and a terrorist who is going to change their religion, and he has only come for one purpose: to eradicate their religion. Obviously Rasulullah intended no such thing. That's why when you look at the peace treaties that Rasulullah wrote, you will find that the Christians and the Jews were told, you can settle your affairs based on your religious understanding, so long as they do not infringe on a human right. Sounds a bit American to me, if you ask me. I think Rasulullah would have been one of the most patriotic people, if you ask me. Right? Again, we mentioned yesterday, American Constitution, mostly is founded on Islamic principles, albeit you wouldn't hear it much unless you do your own readings. So the Prophet was continuously looking for peaceful solutions for Christians and Jews. And in fact, there was more than one peace treaty where Rasulullah wrote saying that it is incumbent upon every Muslim to ensure the protection of the churches of the Christians and the synagogues, because these are houses of worship. So Rasulullah was coming with this beautiful ideal, an ideal that did not exist before. Before, the mentality was, you either follow my religion or you follow your kafan to the grave. And Rasulullah came with the idea that no, my religion says the following: lakum deenakum waliya deen. This is the first time you see an attitude that says, let's agree to disagree, because your religion is yours and mine is mine. If you look at Surah Al-Kafirun, people turn around and say, oh, Khuda, it says Kafirun, it's talking about infidels. No, Allah called it Kafirun because he's saying, okay, you believe infidels to be the worst of the worst? Let me tell you how you should, approach these infidels who are the worst of the worst. Qul, say to them. It's a command from Allah. Whenever Qul comes in the Quran, it is a command from Allah on how you should speak with people. Qul, say, O you who are kafirs and don't believe, pagans, infidels, whatever derogatory term you want to put in for the word kafir, pick it. Say to these people who you think are kuffar and you don't like them and you think the worst of them, you're not going to worship who I worship, and I'm not going to worship who you worship. And I've come to the realization that I can't convince you that my God is better than your God, and you can't convince me that your God is better than my God. So let's come to the understanding that to you is your deen, not your Allah. It's not lakum rabbukum waliya rabb. It's not to you is your God and to me is my God. Lakum deenakum waliya deen. Deen in Arabic is taken from the word dain, which means to loan, to borrow. And the word deen, according to Rasulullah, is ma yudanu bihil mar. Deen are the values which man borrows from others to live their lifestyle. So what you're basically saying is, to you is your values and to me are my own values. To you is your convictions and to me are my convictions. To you is your way of life and to me is my way of life. That is saying, let us agree to disagree. The Shia school of thought, which is in our conviction the closest you can get to the ballpark of what Rasulullah hoped to achieve in theory, maybe not in practice, but in theory, is the closest existing ideals of what true Islam is. It is never about enforcing ideology on others. La ikraha fi din, no compulsion in faith. But the idea of Abu Sufyan was something totally different. And that is because Abu Sufyan and his group of munafiqeen did not even believe that a prophet had come to them. When Abu Sufyan is in Mecca and he sees that Rasulullah has come to take over Mecca, he says the following. When they enter Mecca, look at the peaceful message of Rasulullah. Whomever enters the house of Abu Sufyan and seeks refuge therein is safe. Can you imagine? You're my enemy. You've been harassing me for the last 23 years. Every single battle against me, every single war against me, every assassination against me is all from behind you. You did not leave any home safe for me, nor any land safe for me. And yet the day I overpower you, I say whoever enters your house is safe from evil. When Rasulullah entered Mecca, one of the people grabbed the banner and he said, today is the day of butchering and vengeance. Rasulullah looked at Imam Ali and what did he say? Listen to the words of Rasulullah. Oh Ali, go save Islam. So Imam Ali rushes and takes the banner and he says, Al-Yawm Yawm al-Afwi wal-Maghfirah. Today is the day of pardoning and forgiveness. So Abu Sufyan, when he sees that he is outnumbered, he looks to Rasulullah and he says, is there any way I can save face in the community? I used to be the leader of Mecca, and now all of a sudden I'm a nobody. People are calling me kafir and a pagan. Is there any way I can save myself? So Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet, says to him, if you want to save this neck of yours, say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. He says, La ilaha illallah I've been saying since birth. There's always one God. We always knew that. These pagan gods we made, they're just for business. We always knew there's one God. But to say Muhammad is Rasulullah, that is here. It's stuck. How can I expect, or how can I accept to say that a child who was once in my community running around like a small infant has now become the messenger of God and I should bow to him? No, I can't do that. But I'll tell you what, I'm going to say publicly to save this. And this Sunni Shia books all agree upon it. Then he accepts Islam. Then when he accepted Islam, he is going to meet Rasulullah, and when he goes to meet Rasulullah, he is walking past the Hujjaj. How many people were in Hajj? More than 17,000. For the first time in Arabia, he sees more than 17,000 people who are gathered in one place, ready to die for this religion. He looks to Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet, and he says, our nephew has achieved a phenomenal empire. We can now compete with the Persians and the Romans. Abbas said to him, it's not an empire. These are not military people. These are worshippers of God. Abu Sufyan turned around and said, there is always an opportunity to change that. So therefore he set up Saqifa. He was the perpetrator behind Saqifa, and he ensured that Khilafah was taken away from Ali ibn Abi Talib at the moment that Rasulullah passed away. When Khilafah reached Uthman ibn Affan, Ibn al-Hadid, a Sunni author, who actually believes that killing Shias is wajib, so he's not our friend, says that the moment Uthman took Khilafah, Abu Sufyan at that time was blind. So when the doors closed, he said, is there a Hashimi amongst us? Meaning any supporters of Ali ibn Abi Talib. They said, no, there isn't. He said, then listen to me carefully. Khilafah is now in your hand like a ball. Pass it around you one by one and be sure that it never leaves you. This is when radical Islam became an empire. Some people historically say that the Ottoman Empire was the last of the Khilafat state. Well, you need to look at Al Saud. They may not be as powerful, but in essence, it's exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to reestablish themselves as the caliphs. They have the money, the Arab money, all the oil and everything, and look what they're doing with it. They continue to destroy Islam for their own personal agendas, but that's a discussion for another night. So his opinion was that there is no prophet. Muawiyah lanatullah alayhi, when he makes a peace treaty with Imam Hassan, he places it beneath his feet. We'll talk about this inshallah on Sunday, I think, tomorrow. We'll be discussing Imam Hassan alayhi salamullah. And we'll talk about how they mistreated the Imam. More to the point, Yazid lanatullah alayhi, when the head of Imam Hussein was brought to him, he said the following: the children of Hashim pretended to be divine, so they made an empire. Surely no angel descended on Muhammad and no Quran was revealed. It is a game of kings, and today we are the kings. If my ancestors in Badr were alive today, they would have said, "O Yazid, may your hand never be paralyzed. You killed the Shaykh of Bani Hashim, you killed the best of them." Meaning Imam Hussein alayhi salamullah. A crow comes and settles at his gate, and in Arabic culture, the raven and the crow are considered to be bad omens. So he says to the crow, "O crow, make your noise or be silent. To me it makes no difference. Hussein is killed at my own hands. I don't care for the consequence." So these are people who didn't even care for Allah. Yes, they pretended to be God-fearing people. Umar ibn Sa'd lanatullah alayhi, listen very carefully to the words that were used. "Oh, the horses of Allah trample on the chest of Hussein. They throw a stone at the tent of Imam Hussein with a note that says, 'Oh, the family of Muhammad, we are waiting for what?' So the family of Muhammad, they know who they are. They know this is the family of the Rasul. 'Oh, family of Muhammad, we are waiting for word from the Amir,' meaning Yazid lanatullah alayh. 'So when dawn breaks, if you hear us call out Allahu Akbar, then be prepared for destruction at our hands.'" Isn't that what ISIS is doing today? Yes or no? Okay. So realistically, there are the Shia of Ali and there is the Shia of Abu Sufyan. Everybody in between this and that is someone who is still trying to find their way in life as a Muslim. I won't say there's good and bad, because there are some Shia who follow Yazid traits and there are some Yazidis who follow Imam Hussein's traits. Labels can be misleading. I'm sure you've been to Walmart and found that you've been missold. So don't judge people on the titles they put to themselves. Judge them on the quality of their faith in action. Just on a side note before we go into Masaib. We're living in a society that is America, that doesn't know the differences, or if they do know, they don't speak about it. At least the general public we're speaking about. They don't know about these intrinsic details of differences between who is Yazid and who is Hussein and who is Ali and who is Muawiyah and who is Rasulullah and who is Abu Sufyan. As we said yesterday, to them, Osama bin Laden is the closest thing to Rasulullah. Okay? You find any Arab with a beard, put a rag on his head, that's it. He's a representative of the Prophet. Right? Now let me break it down to you from our duties and responsibilities as a Shia, and what I've seen so far, I don't think this applies to this community, because alhamdulillah, your Marsiyas, your Matam, your Hadith Kisa is all in English, right? And I strongly believe that that should be the case. Because Imam Sajjad said, when you preach, preach in the language of the people. The Sadat, when they went to the Indo-Pak world, they didn't speak in Arabic, and that's why you have Majalis in Urdu, right? And when they went to Iran, they didn't speak in Urdu, they spoke in Farsi, and that's why they have Majalis in Farsi. But it's more than the language, it's the cultural values of a society that we must pay very close attention to. Allow me to explain with the salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. I want to go back to our example yesterday that I'm a white American, my only exposure to Islam is media, Fox News, CNN, and they're doing a wonderful job in being honest. I'm watching Fox News and I see, okay, this is what I'm seeing on Fox News. See a bunch of Arab men speaking in a foreign language with a flag behind them that's black, and in the center of it there's some squiggly writing which I have come to comprehend as Arabic. I don't know what it says, but I know the sign is Arabic. And they're saying words like Allah and Muhammad and, but I don't know what context it's been in. And then all of a sudden they start to cut off the head of a journalist. Okay? And then they say, death to America. Okay, now as a patriot, as an American, I'm feeling somewhat concerned. Okay. To me, this is ISIS equals Islam. Already that's my premise. On Yawm Ashura in downtown DC, I see about a good 1,500 Desi Pakistani men, shirts off, shouting in a foreign language, waving banners that are black with squiggly Arabic writing. You see, I can't read the difference between Hussein and whatever was written on ISIS. I don't know. Be completely honest with yourself. Don't tell me if I'm right or wrong. Just be honest with yourself. If you were an American, do you see ISIS or do you see the Shia of Hussein? Put aside everything that we believe about the importance of Julus and Azadar and Matam. Put that aside. What is the general public seeing? They're not seeing the beauty of Hussein. They are misassociating us. Now we have a duty upon ourselves as per the instructions of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam, whereby he says, Kunu zaynun lana wala takunu shaynun alayna. Be a thing of beauty for us, be a good representation for us, do not bring blame to our doorstep. Tell the people about our akhlaq, they will follow us. If I want to do a julus, it is the most beautiful thing to give up my time and my money. Listen, julus is not cheap. We're paying through the nose for the police that have to be there, for the roads that have to be blocked. But it doesn't necessarily mean I'm not trying to propagate my Indo-Pak culture. I'm not trying to give people knowledge about what it means to be Pakistani, Iraqi, Iranian, none of that. I'm trying to tell people who is Hussein. And therefore my julus should be in the language that the people understand. How much of an impact do you think you will have if our julus, instead of happening during the day when everyone is busy at work and they're not really going to pay attention, if we had our julus at night time? And you've got a line stretching of 1,000 people shoulder to shoulder walking, dressed in black, no slogans being shouted, no matam, no nothing, with candles lit. It's a candle lit vigil, and we walk the streets of Washington DC. And on the sides we have people with informative leaflets that doesn't go too deep. We're using Imam Hussein ibn Ali ibn, you don't need to give them the confusing names. The name Hussein is already confusing enough for them because it's a foreign name. You've got to understand how society works. And you relate to them the values of Imam Hussein. What did he stand for? What did he believe in? What did he die for? How Imam Hussein is the first victim of the ISIS mentality. How the first person to have their head cut off was Hussein ibn Ali. The first person to have his women looted is Hussein ibn Ali. The first person to have his children killed before his own eyes because he refused to subscribe to the ISIS mentality is Hussein ibn Ali. That your 9/11 is our 24/7. That your one day of suffering ISIS and Boko Haram is our eternal history since our inception as a Shia people. And when we can do that, it's a very big impact, because naturally we're appealing to the humanity of people. When they see candlelit vigil, what's the first thing they're going to think? Somebody very important has passed away. Otherwise these people wouldn't be out here dressed in black holding candles. People will naturally approach you. You spark their interest. They'll come up to you and say, excuse me sir, madam, what's going on? Who died? What is the... Because you see, they're used to one thing. Whenever Muslims want to protest, Like Arnold Schwarzenegger asking for candy, right? That's what they used to sing. We shout and we break things and we burn. But all of a sudden they see women in hijab, men wearing black, side by side, silence. Amir al-Mu'mineen gives a lot of importance to silence. He says, we the Ahlul Bayt, when we speak, we are the most eloquent, but when we are silent, nobody can outspeak us. Even in their silence, Ahlul Bayt speak power to truth. Right? We must capitalize and utilize these opportunities that we have. I want to reference Nicholas Machiavelli for a moment here, albeit that he's not really the most ideal person to speak about from the mimbar of Rasulullah, but he speaks truth, and I take truth from wherever I find it. He says, when we are given an opportunity to make a change that benefits us, but we remain silent, and then as a result of our silence we become oppressed, we do not have the right to complain. Today, America is still land of the free when it comes to religious and ideals of faith and practice. Donald Trump is around the corner, baby. I'm serious. What if that changed tomorrow? What if we don't have the opportunity to speak our version of history? What if tomorrow ISIS decides to start blowing things up? Do you think anyone who wants to respond to a suicide bomber over here or in Paris or anywhere else, do you think they're going to make a difference between the hijab of Zainab and the hijab of the other women? They will probably attack our Shia women first and foremost. They'll probably come to our Imam burgers. You know, our Imam burgers are full more days than the other mosques, I should say, right? They're there only for Jummah. We're here at night time. This is the reality that you are living, and we need to make a change. And to make a change, we need to learn from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam Allah. Zainab bint Ali alayha salam, inha wa sallu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. In preparation for Karbala and knowing that the odds will be against them, let us dim out the lights as we recount the tragedies of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam Allah. Sayyidah Zainab, in preparation for Karbala, she knew very well, having grown up with this narrative, having heard from the Holy Prophet, from Imam Ali, from Fatima Zahra, that Karbala is a certainty and it's a calamity that will soon befall them, utilized the medium of educating the masses on who Ahlul Bayt were. And that is our responsibility today. There is an Imam that is coming, and it's our job to educate the masses. Allah made us come to the United States. Believe me, there are people who have paid through the nose to come to the US and they've been refused their visas. The reason yours was accepted is because Allah and the Ahlul Bayt have hopes in you that you can achieve something somebody else may not have achieved. And we should utilize that opportunity. Sayyidah Zainab took in a student by the name of Hinda. We pick up from where we left off with the Masa'ib. Yesterday they brought the BBs into the Darbar. And they made Sayyidah Zainab and her sisters and Imam Sajjad sit in front of Yazid, La'natullah alayh. And Sayyidah Zainab made a promise on that day, and a promise that stands true to this day. O Yazid, exhaust every avenue available to you and utilize whatever means you can. By Allah, you will not eradicate our remembrance, nor will you be able to remove the shame of your deeds. And wait and be patient, and we are also patient, for there shall come a day when the one filing the complaint will be Rasulullah, and the witness is Jibreel, and the judge is the Almighty Allah. Then Yazid begins to insult Sayyidah Zainab alayha salam, and he begins to try to hurt her feelings, but she remains firm. And then he knows that the only way to hurt Zainab alayha salam is by disrespecting the head of Shaheed Karbala. So he picks up a stick, Ajrukum ala Allah, and he begins to strike the face of Imam Hussein until he cuts the lips of the Imam and he breaks the teeth of Abu Abdullah. He then wants to add insult to injury, so he goes to his wife Hinda And he says to her, "O Hinda, I want you to wear the most finest of your clothes and the most precious of your jewels, and I want you to sit on the throne which we have made specifically for this occasion." They make Hinda sit on this throne, and they put her in her finest clothes, in her gowns, in her dresses, in her. And she is there majestically. And then they bring the daughters of Rasulullah and make them sit on the floor. When the daughters of Rasulullah sit on the floor, they lower their heads. Hinda looks at Bibi Zainab. She says, "Salam, O my sister." Bibi Zainab says, "Wa alaykum as-salam." She says, "Sister, where are you from?" She said, "We are from Medina." She said, "Which Medina? There are many Medinas." Bibi Zainab said, "We are from Madinat Rasulullah." When Hinda heard the name of Rasulullah, she took off her crown. She removed her necklace. She took off her earrings. She sat down on the floor. Bibi Zainab looked at her. She said, "Oh my queen, why have you lowered yourself?" She said, "I heard the name of Rasulullah. Out of respect for the Prophet, I sat on the floor." She said, "And how do you know Rasulullah? What association do you have with him?" She said, "I never met him, but I grew up in the house of Rasulullah." She said, "Where did you grow up in the house of Rasulullah?" She said, "I was taken in by Amir al-Mu'mineen. I was a student of Zainab alayha salam." She said, "You know Zainab?" She says, "Of course I know Zainab." She said to her, "Oh Hinda, how well do you know Zainab?" She says, "There is no one more beloved to me in this world than Zainab and the brothers of Zainab." She said to her, "Hinda, would you be able to recognize Zainab if you saw her?" She said, "If Zainab was amongst 1,000 people, I will pick her out of those people." Zainab looked up. She said, "Hinda, then why have you not recognized me?" She said to her, "You are Zainab bint Amir al-Mu'mineen." She said, "I am Zainab bint Amir al-Mu'mineen." She said, "But what has changed your state, O Zainab?" She said, "Karbala changed my state." She said, "Zainab, how can you be a captive? Where is Abu Fadl al-Abbas? Where is the one who was sworn to protect you? Where is Abu Abdullah? Where is Qasim? Where is Aun? Where is Muhammad? Where is Ali al-Akbar?" Zainab alayhi salam said, "If you ask for Abbas, there is the head of Abbas raised on the spear. Oh Hinda, if you ask for Imam Hussein, his head is being struck by Yazid Lanatullah." I say maybe Hinda couldn't recognize Bibi Zainab, but ajrukum ala Allah, after Arba'een, when they brought the Bibis back to Medina, Imam Sajjad walked into Medina. The first to approach him was his uncle Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, the brother of Sayyida Zainab alayha salam. He took Imam Sajjad. He said, "My nephew, let's go away from the people. Let me take you home so you can rest." Wherever he took Imam Sajjad, there was a woman following Imam Sajjad like a shadow. At that moment, Muhammad ibn Hanafiya took out some change. He gave it to the woman. He said, "Oh beggar, leave us and go away." Imam Sajjad began to slap his face. He said, "Uncle Muhammad, do not call her a beggar. This is the daughter of Fatima al-Zahra. This is the daughter of Amir al-Mu'mineen." Zainab looked to Muhammad. She said, "I don't blame you if you don't recognize me. You did not see what's happened in Karbala." لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا آل محمد أي منقلب سينقلبون. Ilahi wa Sayyidi wa Mawlai, we beseech you by the wasila and the wasila of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salamullah, raise from this gathering a people who will put the affairs of Ahlul Bayt before any other affair, a people who will strive to become representation and a good representation for the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salamullah. Ilahi, preserve our Imam for us and preserve us for him. Make us of those who render him our service at any cost to ourselves, to our finances, to our children, to our families. Oh Allah, bless these eyes with the sight of the Nur of Zahra, so that we may see him and he may see us. Convey our salams to him and ask him kindly and sincerely to keep us in his dua in the same way that we keep him in our du'as. O Allah, for the bani of this majlis and for the mu'mineen and the mu'minat in this gathering, forgive their marhumin of all their sins and raise them in a status where they are the neighbors of Muhammadin and Ali Muhammad. For our marhumin and your marhumin, especially for the marhumin of the bani of the majlis, رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.